So good day to each and every one of us. I am Ken Arnold J. Torres from Group 4, and today we will be discussing the novel El Filibusterismo. So without further ado, let's get started. So it all began after Rizal read the novel Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. He had inspiration to write his own novel to expose the abuse, corruptions, and discrimination of Spaniards towards the Filipinos. El Filibusterismo, or Reign of Greed in English, is the second and the last novel written by Jose Rizal. It is the sequel of the novel No Le Mi Tangere. El Filibusterismo is originally written in Castilian or Old Spanish. So it took 3 years for Rizal to finish it, and it contains 38 chapters, which is shorter than No Le Mi Tangere. So Rizal started to write the El Filibusterismo back in October 1887 and continued writing it while he was staying in London, Paris, and Madrid. And only on March 29, 1891, he finished writing the El Filibusterismo and was then published on September 18, 1891 by the publisher F. Meyer van Loo Press in Ghent, Belgium. And from there it was translated to different languages like English, German, Japanese, French, and Tagalog. We know that both No Le Mi Tangere and El Filibusterismo ignited the Philippine Revolution against the Spaniards. El Filibusterismo was written in dedication to the 3 martyred priests, namely Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, or most commonly known as the Gomburza. Rizal wishes to enlighten the minds of the Filipino and the society closer to the truth that the Spaniards are abusing and discriminating them. Turino 2014 noted that in El Filibusterismo, Jose Rizal is most bitter and serious, that he no longer accepts the dire situation that the Filipinos are suffering under the Spaniards. He is angry of the Spaniards and the friars who abuse and discriminates the Filipinos and making their life miserable and hopeless. If we look at the comparison that Gregorio Zaid 2008 has made, we can see that there are many aspects that differ in the two novels. For example, the No Le Mi Tangere is more of like a romantic novel that contains freshness and color. It also contains humor, lightness, and wit. On the other hand, El Filibusterismo is more of like a political novel that contains bitterness and includes hatred, pain, violence, and sorrow in it.
On July 5, 1891, Jose Rizal left Brussels for Ghent. The reasons Rizal went to Ghent was because the cost of living there was lower compared to that of Brussels. He wanted to find a cheaper printing press for the El Filibusterismo to be published, and he wanted to escape from the enticing attraction of Suzanne Jacobi. There, he lived a frugal life along with Jose Alejandro in a cheap boarding house. The two gentlemen would then subsist themselves on the various necessities like eating biscuits for breakfast. The El Fili was barely funded at the time for many reasons. Jose Rizal was at Biarritz, France before heading to Ghent. He announced his resignation from the propaganda movement after abdicating his leadership in Madrid in January 1891 due to jealous compatriots' intrigues. He used to get a monthly allowance of 50 pesos. When Rizal went to Europe, he wasn't able to practice his profession of being a doctor because his goal of staying there was to study the cultures, beliefs, and practices of the people. His family at that time was in a very tight place, so they couldn't help Rizal with his financial needs. Pasiano, his brother, was no longer able to send him his allowance. His family's livelihood was ruined, as it was for other Calamba tenants. Rizal ceased to contribute to La Solidaridad. He retired from the propaganda campaign at the same time. Even though Rizal struggled for the publishing of his novel, he had help from his comrades for it to be done. One of them was Maximo Viola, who, at that time, lent Rizal 300 pesos for 2,000 copies of the El Filibusterismo. It was eventually translated into several languages, including English, German, French, Japanese, Tagalog, Ilonggo, Its importance as a social document of the late 19th century Philippines is frequently highlighted in this nationalist novel by an author who has been dubbed the first Filipino.
To continue, when he arrived in Ghent, Rizal looks for a cheaper printing shop that could give him the lowest cost for the publication. And he found F. Mayer Van Loo Press, located at number 66 Vianderan Street, who was willing to print his novel by installment. So as payment, he bought his jewels, which served as a partial payment for the printing. And Rizal became so desperate that he was worried during the printing because his funds ay paubos na. But soon, he received an amount of 200 pesos from Rodriguez Arias for the copies of Morgas Sucesos sold in Manila. And he also received financial assistance from BASA, but it was not still enough to finish the printing of the novel. So in July 1891, he wrote a letter to BASA saying that soon I'll have to stop publishing it if no money comes in. Then later, on August 6, 1891, the printing process was suspended due to Rizal's lack of funds to continue printing the novel. So he was on the point of burning all El Filibusterismo's manuscript at that time, which also happened during the printing of No Limitangere. So he wrote another letter to Basa informing him that the printing had to be stopped due to a lack of funds. So when all seemed lost, assistance arrived from unexpected source. So when Valentin Ventura heard of Rizal's situation, he sent Rizal money needed to continue printing the novel. So he was the one who financed or somehow gave money to Rizal to continue the printing. So he is the El Filibusterismo's savior. So as a result, the printing process has resumed. And finally, on September 18, 1891, El Filibusterismo came off the press. So Rizal sent copies to Basa and Sixto Lopez in Hong Kong. Then Rizal gratefully gave the original manuscript to Valentin Ventura and an autographed printed copy of the manuscript as a sign of gratitude. He also sent copies to Blumentritt, Ponce, Lopez Haina, Pardo de Tavera, Antonio Luna, and Juan Luna. So, the members of the Filipino colony of Barcelona published a tribute in La Publicidad, a Barcelona newspaper, eulogizing the novel's original style. So the liberal Madrid newspaper El Nuevo Regimen serialized the novel in its October 1891 issues. So all the copies of the first edition of El Filibusterismo were shipped to Hong Kong, but almost all the wooden boxes containing the books were confiscated. So the book became rare, and the remaining Ghent copies were sold at very high prices, reaching 400 pesetas per copy. So, but now, the original manuscript of the novel of Rizal's handwriting is now preserved in the Filipiniana Division of the Bureau of Public Diaries, Manila. So, the Philippine government bought the novel from Valentin Ventura, which cost 10,000 pesos. So, it consists of 279 pages of long sheets of paper, and to save money on printing, the foreword and warning have been removed. So in addition, the title page of El Filibusterismo contains an inscription written by Ferdinand Blumentritt. El Filibusterismo is dedicated to the three martyred priests who are called Gomburza. So they are Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. So they were executed by Spanish colonial authorities on charges of subversion arising from the 1872 Cavite Mutiny noong February 17, 1872. But through the years, Rizal had not forgotten the martyrdom of the Gomburza. Kaya, he dedicated his novel El Filibusterismo to these three priests. And in his dedication, he wrote, "To the memory of the priest Mariano Gomez, 85 years old, Jose Burgos, 30 years old, and Jacinto Zamora, 35 years old, executed on the gallows of Bagong Bayan on February 28, 1872. However, not everything stated here is correct. Kasi at that time, at the time of execution, Gomez was 73, not 85, Burgos was 35, not 30, and Zamora was 37, not 35. And Rizal also got the date wrong kasi Gumburza were executed on February 17, 1872, not February 28.
Symbolism of characters. First, we have Simon. Simon represents the revolutionaries during that time who supported the idea of holding bloody revolt against the Spanish government. His death in El Filibusterismo tells readers that Rizal does not support the armed revolution. Next, we have Basilio. He represents the youth with a simple dream that his education will improve his social and economic status in the future and is indifferent and selfish to the needs of society. Isagani. Isagani is the symbol of the youth whose love for the country is great to the point of being branded as idealistic. Next, we have Cabezang Tales. He personified a typical Filipino who is content with living a simple life. He also symbolizes the natives and farmers whose lands were seized by the friars, an explanation to why Filipinos became rebels. Makaraig. Makaraig represented the well-to-do Filipino youth during the Spanish era who had good dreams for the country. His character also provided readers a glimpse of how different the rich and the poor were treated during that time in society. Next, we have Paulita Gomez. Paulita Gomez is a caricature of a woman who chooses the best option for a more stable future. She knows what is best for her and would take advantage of her admirers to get what she wants. Here we have Father Florentino. He represented the secular Filipino priest in Rizal's time. It was also through his character that the author stressed his disapproval of a bloody revolt. Huli, like Maria Clara, symbolizes the purity and innocence of the lower class women during Rizal's time. She would rather sacrifice rather than give up her ideals. Benzaib. He personifies a corrupted media. So, Benzaib is a type of person who is really relatable, especially these days where campaigning for election is happening right now. So, some media are biased towards their favorite or their preferred candidate. Placido Penitente. Placido means silent and penitente means suffering. Combining those words, silent suffering or in Tagalog, tahimik na pagluluksa. Senyor Pasta. He represents the part of the society that is only generous and sympathetic to the rich and powerful. Next, we have Father Irene. He embodies the few Spaniards who are sympathetic to the Filipinos. Father Camora. He represents a friar with a particular predilection for young women. So, he likes younger women, and which is not good, which is not favorable, especially him being a part of the church. Next, we have Kapitan Tiago. He symbolizes the rich Filipinos who oppress their fellow Filipinos. So, Kapitan Tiago treats his fellow Filipino with cruelty and unjust behavior. Tadeo. Tadeo represents students who always miss classes by pretending to be sick. So, it is a timely behavior which can be observed, especially now where classes are being held online. Pepay. Pepay represents women who gives happiness to men with an exchange. So that exchange could be sexually or something that could bring happiness to men. We know what it is. Mr. Leeds. He represents deceptive people. So considering his character or his role, which is a magician. So it's maybe an innate behavior for someone who is a magician to have a deceptive behavior or manloloko, ganun. So Pekson, he symbolizes ignorance. So Pekson is in a part of his life where he is learning or he is trying to figure out something such what are things meant for. Father Milon, he represents someone who sees himself better than anyone else. So it is very self-explanatory that Father Milon is someone who is not humble. So he sees himself the best above all. Next, we have Doña Victorina. So she represents those people who became judgmental and liars after getting rich. Yun bang nagkapera ka lang, umiba na yung pag-uugali mo. Naging sinungaling ka na at naging mapangmata ka na sa mga tao sa paligid mo. Next, we have Chinaman Kiruga. So he represents psychopaths. So psychopaths means sip-sip. So he is befriending those who are in power and praises them so that it will be a benefit for him in the future. Next, we have Don Custodio. So he symbolizes boastfulness. So from the word itself, boastfulness, mayabang siya. So it's very self-explanatory. So next, we have Tandang Selo. He symbolizes patience. Those people who is does not have a typical behavior, which is patience, no? Yung kahit ilang beses mo siyang inisin, hindi talaga siya naiinis, and he keeps on understanding people. So he has the patience since he symbolizes patience. Hermana Penchang, she symbolizes sagpangs, rich, pusakal, or gamblers. We know what gamblers are, and those are mga sugarol, no? Father Fernandez, he symbolizes a priest who is polite, welcoming to everyone, and willing to listen to others people points or point of view. So he is an ideal priest. So next, we have Hermana Bali. So she represents kind and helpful people. So next, we have Sandoval. He represents compassion and equal treatment. When you say equal treatment, hindi lamang yung treatment niya sa isa, hindi kulang yung treatment niya sa isa, kundi equal treatment. Pantay-pantay na pagtrato. So next, we have Father Salve. So Father Salve represents the clergy during the time who disguise the yearnings of the flesh under the authority of the church to get what they want. So he is an opportunist who is waiting for the time and is using something for his own good. So Captain General, he represents a leader who has a great disdain against the friars and corrupt officials. So if you relate Captain General to leaders nowadays, it is very rare to see someone acting or who has the character same as him. It is very rare to see someone nowadays. So next, we have Juanito Pilaes. So he symbolizes class clowns referred to as barbero. So you say class clowns, those people are somewhat the reason of our happiness. Now those people who makes us laugh. So lastly, we have Father Sibila. So he represents extremely religious and conservative people.
Good day everyone, I am Aliona Jasper G. Sinarillos. So, here are some main focus of El Filibusterismo. First is fighting for freedom. El Filibusterismo inspired the Filipinos to fight for their freedom against the abusive and oppressive Spaniards. Gusto ni Jose Rizal na ma-realize ng mga Filipino na nasa kanilang kamay ang kanilang kalayaan. Kailangan nilang mamulat sa katotohanan at gumawa ng aksyon. Second is presence of corrupt government. Rizal's novel accurately depicted the self-serving government officials in the forms of friars. In the novel, we could see how those in power abused their position to get favors and satisfy their lust. Yes, in the novel, Jose Rizal wanted to expose the wrongdoings of the government and the corruption of the government and the abuse of their power. Next is importance of education. In El Filibusterismo, officials tried to preserve a monopoly for education. This meant that not everybody had an equal opportunity to better themselves through knowledge. Rizal showed that those in power would rather rule over the uneducated. So, education is important those times because the Spaniards did not want the Filipinos to be more educated for them to easily control the Filipinos. So what are the effects of El Filibusterismo into Philippine society? This had a profound effect on Philippine society in terms of views about national identity, the Catholic faith and its influence on Filipinos' choice, and the government's issues of corruption, abuse, and discrimination. And on a larger scale, the issues related to the effect of colonization in people's lives and the cause of independence. Rizal already did his part. It's now our time to put into action the words and wisdom that Rizal left. We must not let these words just remain words. El Filibusterismo remains relevant to our society today to remind us that a good system of government or a good leadership will lead to the success of the Filipinos or to the success of our country. Walang makakapantay sa katapangan ginawa ni Jose Rizal sa panahon natin ngayon. His selflessness brought us freedom. So, may nakita ba kayong ibang leader na selfless katulad ni Jose Rizal na walang sariling interes? El Filibusterismo was published to punish the friars' government by exposing their corruptions. Even today, corruption is still practiced in the government. That is why there is a law about corruption. Pero, hindi pa rin lahat ng mga corrupt officials ay nakukulong dahil sa kanilang kapangyarihan at pera. As the election is coming up, may you have learned something about Jose Rizal's writing and think about the betterment of our country. That's all, thank you. I will end our discussion by leaving a quote from Jose Rizal saying, "On this battlefield, man has no better weapon than his intelligence, no other force but his heart."
So, our story begins on the steamboat Tabo as it makes its way up the Pasig River from Manila on its way to Laguna de Bay. The boat is split into two decks. The top, that has all the illustrious and rich passengers, and the bottom, where basically everyone else is staying, which, by the way, is an interesting show of symbolism that represented the social hierarchy back then. On the top, we had the rich and known Spanish, then their confidants, and at the bottom are the Indios or the natives and the poorer Chinamen. Among our passengers on this ship are Ibarra, who is now known as Simon, the rich jeweler, Doña Victorina, the ridiculously pro-Spanish Indio woman who is in search of her estranged husband, Paulita Gomez, the pretty and rich orphan niece of the Doña, Ben Zaib, a prolific Spanish journalist, Padres Sibilia, Camora, Salvi, Rene, and Florentino, Don Custodio, a high-up and well-respected pro-Spanish Filipino, Isagani, Padre Florentino's nephew, as well as the lover of Paulita, and Basilio, if you can recall from the last book, the son of Sisa, who is now about to graduate medical school, thanks to his patron, Capitan Tiago. Simon, as mentioned before, is now bitter and cynical, and only believes that violence and sabotage is the only way to overthrow the Spanish government. and he plants himself as an agitator and saboteur, violently siding with the Spaniards and encouraging abuse against the masses, which would stir up a revolution, basically making himself the bad guy, which I find very admirable. He lost everything and returns willing to lose everything a second time so the revolution may push through. Albeit his methods are all that successful, spoiler alert. Anywho, Simon is able to smuggle firearms into the country through Quiroga, a rich Chinese merchant that owes Simon a great deal of money. His first plot, however, is kind of botched by the fact that he's told that Maria Clara had died by Basilio. That absolute intellectual. Anyways, back to the story. On Christmas Eve, Basilio is back in San Diego, which is the town where Capitan Tiago lives and is also the place where the events of Noli take place, and slips out into a forest property that was once owned by Ibarra to visit the graves of his mother Sisa and the revolutionary Elias. So when he gets there, he finds that he isn't the first to arrive there, and surprise, surprise, it's our old pal Simon. So stuff happens, lives are threatened, revelations are made, and Simon tries to get Basilio to join the revolution, using what happened to his mother and brother at the hands of the Spaniards against him. Basilio is understandably shaken up by this, but tells Simon that he'll still have to think about it. See, Basilio is in love with this girl named Juli, who is the daughter of Cabezang Tales, a man who had once been successful, but had everything stolen from him by the friars, and, while trying to guard what he had left, he was captured by bandits that held him at a very high ransom, and to pay that ransom, Juli had to offer herself as a servant to Hermana Penchang, a pious Catholic. Basilio heard about all of this, so with his savings, he freed Juli from her obligations to Hermana Penchang and bought a small house that Juli and her grandfather, Tandangzelo, could live in. Another thing about Basilio is, he's part of a student group that is pushing to have a school for the Spanish language built, but have so far been heavily opposed by the Dominicans for some reason. The students do end up having the plan for the school approved, but they don't get to manage the teaching. I guess that's still worth celebrating because they go over to a panciteria to celebrate their victory with dinner. Everyone except Basilio, who had to stay with Capitan Tiago because he was sick. While eating, the students end up mocking some of the priests and even Don Custodio, but unknown to them, there was someone watching and listening in on their conversation. The next day, Basilio wanders over to the university to find that all classes had been suspended because rebellious posters and notes had been posted all over the doors at the school, and that the students that had been at the gathering the night before had been arrested. So Basilio, in true shonen anime protagonist fashion, hurries over to the house of the leader of the student group, and they are both subsequently arrested. So Basilio, with nobody to vouch for him, because Capitan Tiago had what? So Capitan Tiago's dead, and Basilio sat in prison and stayed there, long after all the students had been taken home by their families. When Juli hears of this, she tries her best to get support to have Basilio released, and this doesn't work. So with no one else to go to, she reluctantly heads over to the convent to ask help from Padre Camora, which ultimately wasn't a good idea because that meeting ends up with Juli jumping out of the convent window to get away from him. Man! So eventually, it's Simon who gets Basilio out of prison using his super cool connections. But because of his experiences in there, as well as the news of the death of Juli, Basilio executes a flawless Ibarra 180 and joins the band of rebels that Simon had organized. Also, while they were all in prison, Paulita decided to leave Isagani for the other boy she had in her life, Juanito Pelaez, a Spanish mestizo. Simon was able to hasten the preparations for the wedding by offering a loan to Juanito's father so that he could buy the house of the now late Capitan Tiago. Later, Simon reveals his big plan to Basilio. The wedding was going to be a very big event, so naturally, a lot of very important Spanish officials and people would be there. He would give the newlyweds a beautiful-looking lamp that was filled with a highly explosive chemical nitroglycerin. When the lamp began to dim, someone would move over there and relight it, causing the nitroglycerin to explode, setting off the gunpowder that laced the corners of the house, causing an even larger explosion, killing everyone inside. The explosion would act as a signal for the other rebels to start the general rebellion in Manila, thus marking the start of the Philippine Revolution. Surprisingly, Basilio is cool with the entire plan. Come on, man. What would your now dead girlfriend think? Later, Basilio wanders near the ill-fated wedding and runs into Isagani, the crestfallen lover of Paulita. Seeing as the house was rigged to explode, Basilio, the highly intellectual person he is, tells Isagani Simon's entire plot. Isagani reacts about as well as you'd think, and rushes into the house as soon as the lamplight began dying, and tosses it into the river, diving in as well not too far after. This ruins the entire scheme, and Simon is exposed as a traitor, eventually ending up being chased by the Guardia Civil with guns, again. When the house failed to explode, the rebels took things into their own hands and attacked all too early and were destroyed by the Guardia Civil. So, if you weren't keeping count, Simon is now on the run from an angry government and an angry band of rebels. Wounded and ruined, Simon makes his way to the home of Padre Florentino, who takes him in and tries his best to heal him. A couple of days later, Padre Florentino receives a letter telling him to warn his Spanish guest that the Guardia Civil were coming in a week's time to arrest him and that they were armed with guns. Don Tiburcio, who had been there the entire length of the book, takes one look at the letter and yeets off. Simon hears about the letter and, deciding that dying was better than being captured, takes poison. On his deathbed, Simon tells Padre Florentino everything, his full name, what he'd been doing, the full nollie, and Padre Florentino listens to the full story, and this takes the better part of the day. And when all that is said and done, Simon finally and does actually die. So there you have it. After several botched love stories, a vengeful plan gone wrong, and many, many, many character deaths, is El Filibusterismo. Long story short, not everyone bites the dust.
Sana'y di magmaliw ang dati kong araw nang munti pang bata sa piling ni nanay. Nais kong maulit ang awit ni inang mahal, awit ng pag-ibig habang ako'y nasa